For hundreds of thousands of years, they ruled Europe, thriving in landscapes that would kill us in days, hunting massive beasts with nothing but wooden spears and raw power. They weren't just another type of human. They were absolute freaks of nature, the Neanderthals. If these stories interest you, hit that subscribe button. Drop your location and time in the comments too. I love seeing the mix. I once had someone from Helsinki and someone from Houston on the same video. One's in tomorrow, the other's in yesterday, or something like that. You think you're strong? You've got nothing on them. The average Neanderthal could crush your hand without even trying. Their bones were thicker, their muscles denser, their strength beyond anything we modern humans could even imagine. For years, we thought they were just primitive cavemen, hunched, brutish, and too dumb to compete with us. But that story, it was wrong. Dead wrong. Recent discoveries have completely shattered everything we thought we knew about these ancient humans. Not only were they physically superior to us in almost every way, but their brains were actually bigger than ours. They made complex tools, controlled fire, created art, and survived in extreme environments that would wipe out modern human populations. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving in some of the harshest places Earth has ever known. So what made them such extraordinary physical specimens? And if they were so remarkable, why aren't they still here? Why did they disappear while we flourished? The answers challenge everything you think you know about human evolution. The story of the Neanderthals begins about 400,000 years ago, when a group of ancient humans became isolated in Europe during a massive ice age. Cut off from other human populations in Africa, these Europeans began to evolve unique traits that made them perfectly suited for the brutal conditions of Ice Age Europe. Their bodies grew stockier and more powerful, not because they were primitive, but because they were evolving into specialized survival machines. When you look at a Neanderthal skeleton, the first thing that jumps out is the sheer thickness of their bones. Their skeletons were significantly denser than ours. A Neanderthal femur, that's the thigh bone, could withstand forces that would snap a modern human's leg like a twig. Their arms and legs show massive muscle attachment sites, spots where their powerful muscles anchored to the bone. Scientists studying those points can tell just how insanely strong their biceps, triceps, and forearms were. But it wasn't just brute strength. Their entire body was built differently. They had barrel-shaped chests, much wider than ours, especially toward the bottom of the rib cage. This gave them larger lungs and a more efficient cardiovascular system, crucial for high-energy activity in freezing climates. Their pelvises were wider too, giving them a lower center of gravity and incredible stability and power. Look at a Neanderthal skull, and you'll immediately notice that massive brow ridge above the eyes. That wasn't just for show. It helped support their large face and protected their eyes. Their noses were much larger than ours, with wide nostrils and a pronounced bridge, another adaptation to the cold. A bigger nose with more internal surface area helped warm and humidify freezing air before it reached their lungs, preventing cold damage that would cripple modern humans without technology. Their large sinuses helped with that too. These weren't primitive traits. They were advanced adaptations that let Neanderthals thrive in environments that would kill most of us. Their jaws were another evolutionary marvel. Neanderthals had no chin. Their jaw curved straight back from the teeth without the forward point we have, but what they lacked in chins, they made up for in jaw strength. Their mandibles were thicker and stronger, capable of tremendous bite force. The wear on their teeth shows they often used their mouths like a third hand, gripping animal hides or tools while working. Their incisors, the front teeth, were larger and showed unique wear patterns. Some researchers believe they regularly used those teeth to hold and pull animal skins, something no modern human could do without destroying their teeth fast. All these physical traits point to one clear fact: Neanderthals were powerhouses. But how strong were they, really? Scientists have used their bone structures to estimate strength, and the numbers are staggering. The average Neanderthal likely had upper body strength at least 1.5 times greater than a typical modern human male. Some estimates say their arms could be twice as strong as even trained athletes. Their grip strength? Off the charts. A modern man's grip averages around 80 to 120 pounds of pressure. The average Neanderthal? Well over 200 pounds. Per hand. They could easily crush objects we'd need tools for. And that power wasn't just for show. It was their way of life. Unlike later humans, who developed long-range weapons to kill from a distance, Neanderthals were close combat hunters. They made heavy thrusting spears, not to throw, but to drive straight into huge, dangerous animals up close. Just think about that. Neanderthals hunting woolly rhinos, cave bears, mammoths, massive beasts that could easily kill a human, and doing it face to face, not because they didn't know better, but because it was their strategy. Their physical design made it work perfectly in the harsh worlds they lived in. The physical evidence of this high-risk hunting strategy is literally written in their bones. Neanderthal skeletons show injury patterns strikingly similar to those seen in modern rodeo riders. Healed fractures across the body, especially in the head, neck, and upper torso. Exactly the kind of damage you'd expect from close encounters with massive, dangerous animals. One study found that about 80% of adult Neanderthals showed signs of at least one major healed injury. The most famous case is the old man of La Chapelle-aux-Saints, a Neanderthal who lived to about 40 years old, elderly by Paleolithic standards. His skeleton shows multiple healed fractures, broken ribs, a crushed toe, knee damage, and severe dental abscesses. And yet, he survived for years afterward, proof that his community cared for him during recovery. This wasn't a gentle world they lived in, and their bones make it clear they faced that brutality head-on. Their strength and hunting strategy were only part of what made Neanderthals extraordinary. Their bodies were also perfectly engineered to survive extreme cold, in ways that went far beyond having just larger noses. Their entire body proportions were different from ours, optimized for heat retention. Modern humans evolved in Africa, with long limbs and slim builds suited for releasing heat, a high surface area to volume ratio that helps us cool down. Neanderthals evolved the opposite physique. Shorter limbs, thicker builds, and compact frames that reduced the surface area for heat loss. Their bodies resembled those of modern Arctic populations like the Inuit, but even more extreme. This wasn't about comfort. It was about survival. When glacial temperatures plummeted, the Neanderthals' compact, muscular bodies were far more efficient at retaining heat than ours. That meant they could get by with less. Fewer layers of clothing, less fuel for fires, and less food to maintain body temperature. Speaking of food, Neanderthals needed a lot of it. Their powerful muscles, large brains, and freezing environments demanded enormous caloric intake. Scientists estimate they required anywhere from 3,500 to 5,000 calories a day, roughly double what an average sedentary modern human eats, and on par with Olympic athletes in training. Where did all those calories come from? Mostly from meat. Isotope analysis of Neanderthal bones shows they were top-level carnivores, getting most of their protein from large herbivores like deer, bison, wild horses, even woolly rhinos and mammoths. In some areas, they seem to specialize in hunting reindeer during migrations, ambushing herds at strategic choke points in the landscape. That doesn't mean they never ate plants. Recent analysis of dental plaque from Neanderthal teeth revealed traces of grains, tubers, and even medicinal plants. But the big picture is clear. Their diet was heavily meat-based, especially in the cold northern regions where plant foods were rare. This meat-heavy diet wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was a biological necessity. In the frozen environments of Ice Age Europe, plants were scarce and seasonal. High-energy animal foods, not just muscle meat, but fat, marrow, and organs, provided the dense calories Neanderthals needed to keep their bodies running through the brutal cold. And how they got all that meat? That's where their sheer power and hunting skill really showed. Archaeological sites across Europe reveal that Neanderthals were strategic, coordinated hunters capable of taking down the biggest and most dangerous prey of the Ice Age. Excavations have uncovered butchered remains of reindeer, wild horses, woolly rhinos, and even young mammoths. The cut marks on those bones tell the story. Neanderthals weren't scavengers. They were butchering entire carcasses, stripping meat, cracking bones for marrow, and harvesting fat and organs. In some sites, like La Côte de Saint-Brelade in Jersey, evidence suggests Neanderthals drove mammoth herds off cliffs to kill them efficiently. In France, at sites like La Borde, mass kill sites of bison suggest they used natural traps to corral and slaughter entire herds. These weren't opportunistic hunters, they were planners. The bones show they often targeted prime-age adults, the strongest, most dangerous animals, but also the most nutritious. That kind of selective hunting required not just brute force, but intelligence, coordination, and strategy. Their weapons reflected that. While their toolkit wasn't as diverse as that of later humans, it was remarkably effective. Wooden spears found at Schöningen, Germany, dating back 300,000 years, show just how advanced they were. These weren't crude sticks. They were precisely crafted from spruce, with the weight balanced forward like modern javelins. The tips were hardened by carefully charring them over fire, making them tough enough to pierce thick animal hides. Even more surprising, evidence from the site of Abri-du-Mara in France shows Neanderthals sometimes used projectile weapons. Microscopic wear patterns on stone points suggest they were used as thrown spear tips. They weren't limited to hand-thrust weapons, they had some long-range capability too. And perhaps most impressive of all, they mastered adhesive technology. At multiple sites, scientists have found traces of birch bark tar, an ancient glue Neanderthals made by heating birch bark in low oxygen conditions. The process is incredibly complex. Even modern experiments using primitive tools often fail to reproduce it successfully. Yet Neanderthals did it, repeatedly. They used that tar to attach stone blades to wooden shafts, creating advanced composite tools. Their lifestyle also left a distinct physical imprint: asymmetry. Neanderthal arm bones show a clear pattern. Their right arms were much stronger than their left. This is exactly what you'd expect from a lifetime of powerful, right-handed thrusting motions, the kind used in close-range hunting. All of this shows that their incredible strength wasn't purely genetic. It was built through constant, intense physical activity from childhood. We shouldn't picture Neanderthals as just stronger versions of us. Their entire physiology was different, tuned to their environment and lifestyle. They likely had more fast-twitch muscle fibers for explosive power over endurance. Their metabolic rates were higher, their cardiovascular systems more efficient at delivering oxygen during bursts of extreme effort. Their bodies were better at conserving heat in the freezing cold. These weren't primitive traits, they were specialized adaptations that made Neanderthals extraordinarily successful in their world. For over 300,000 years, they thrived, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the edges of the Arctic, surviving countless ice ages and sudden climate swings that would challenge even modern humans armed with technology. But their physical might wasn't the most surprising thing about them. The real shock came from what we learned about their brains. For decades, scientists assumed Neanderthals were intellectually inferior, their elongated skulls and heavy brow ridges seen as signs of lower intelligence. But when more complete skulls were studied, one fact stood out. Neanderthal brains were actually bigger than ours. On average, their brain volume was about 1,600 cubic centimeters compared to 1,400 in modern humans. Some Neanderthal specimens had brains as large as 1,740 cubic centimeters, bigger than even the largest modern human brains. Now, brain size isn't everything, of course. Internal organization matters too. But here again, detailed studies of Neanderthal skull endocasts, models of the brain based on the internal shape of the skull, have revealed surprising sophistication. While their brains were organized a bit differently than ours, with relatively larger areas devoted to vision and body control, they still had well-developed frontal lobes, the regions associated with planning, decision-making, and social behavior. The implications are clear. Neanderthals weren't cognitively inferior to modern humans. They were simply different. Their brains were adapted to the unique challenges of their environment, with enhanced abilities in spatial awareness, visual processing, and motor control, all critical skills for hunters navigating complex terrain and facing dangerous prey at close range. This neural difference extended to their senses as well. Studies of Neanderthal skulls suggest they had larger eye sockets than modern humans, possibly meaning larger eyes and enhanced vision, particularly in low-light conditions. That would have been a huge advantage for hunters in the dark forests of Ice Age Europe, especially during long winters with limited daylight. Their sense of smell was likely distinct too. The structure of their nasal cavity suggests a more acute sense of smell, a valuable edge for tracking prey or detecting danger. Even their hearing may have been tuned to their world. Studies of Neanderthal ear bones show differences that suggest heightened sensitivity to certain frequencies, possibly useful for picking up prey sounds or communicating in forested environments. All these sensory traits paint a picture not of primitive brutes, but of highly specialized humans, perfectly adapted to life as Ice Age hunters in Europe's forests and steppes. And the evidence for their intelligence goes far beyond brain size. The archaeological record shows that Neanderthals engaged in behaviors once thought to be unique to modern humans, activities that required abstract thought, planning, and cultural learning. They controlled fire not just for warmth, but for cooking, transforming tough, fibrous foods into more digestible forms and unlocking more calories from their diet. They made complex tools that required multiple steps to produce, including composite tools that combined different materials. They cared for their injured and elderly, as shown by skeletons with healed wounds that would have required long-term care to survive. And most surprising of all, they created art and symbolic objects. Across Europe, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of Neanderthal creativity. Pigments processed into colorants, shell beads likely used as ornaments, and even cave paintings that predate the arrival of modern humans. At Bruniquel Cave in France, researchers found something truly astonishing. A circular structure built from broken stalagmites, deep in a cave where no natural light could reach. It's dated to 176,000 years ago, when only Neanderthals lived in Europe. That means they were venturing deep underground, controlling fire for light, and constructing organized formations for reasons we can only speculate about, perhaps ritual, perhaps social. These weren't the actions of mindless cavemen. They were the behaviors of intelligent, creative beings with rich social lives and cultural traditions, forcing us to completely rethink who the Neanderthals really were. So if Neanderthals were so strong, so well adapted, and so cognitively advanced, why did they disappear? Why did our ancestors, with weaker bodies and similar brain sizes, survive while the mighty Neanderthals vanished? The answer isn't simple. Scientists still debate it, but several factors likely played a role. One key reason was climate change. Around 40,000 years ago, Europe went through a series of rapid, extreme temperature swings known as Heinrich events. These sudden freezes drastically altered ecosystems, reducing populations of the big animals Neanderthals depended on, making their high-calorie, meat-heavy diet harder to sustain. Another major factor, the arrival of modern humans. Starting around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens spread into Europe, bringing new technologies, different hunting strategies, and possibly more complex social structures, advantages that may have tipped the balance in their favor. There's little evidence of outright warfare, no mass graves or skeletons with weapon wounds suggesting genocide, but even peaceful competition for resources could have slowly driven Neanderthal populations into decline. Disease may have been another blow. Modern humans migrating from Africa likely carried pathogens that Neanderthals had never encountered and no immunity against. Those diseases could have devastated their already shrinking populations. But perhaps the most fascinating discovery of all is that Neanderthals didn't completely disappear. Genetic studies show that most modern humans outside Africa carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. That means our ancestors didn't just compete with Neanderthals, they interbred with them. So rather than being wiped out entirely, Neanderthals may have been gradually absorbed into the growing modern human population as their numbers declined. Their genetic legacy lived on, diluted, but never lost. The story of the Neanderthals isn't one of failure or extinction. It's a story of adaptation, resilience, and transformation. Their physical power and specialized traits made them incredibly successful for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than our species has even existed. And parts of them still live within us today. Neanderthals weren't failed humans or evolutionary dead ends. They were extraordinary beings, built to survive and thrive in some of the harshest environments Earth has ever known. Their story reminds us that there's not just one way to be human. There are many paths our evolution could have taken. As we've seen, Neanderthals were true physical freaks of nature. Their bones were stronger, their muscles more powerful, their bodies tougher and more resilient than ours could ever be. They were specialized survival machines, perfectly adapted to Ice Age Europe. But their story isn't finished. With every new discovery and every new piece of technology, our understanding of these ancient humans keeps evolving. And as we'll see in the next part of this exploration, their physical power was matched by cognitive and technological brilliance, forcing us to completely rethink who they were, how they lived, and what it truly means to be human. The evidence is undeniable. Neanderthals weren't primitive brutes. They were sophisticated, intelligent, and powerful humans whose biology and culture were perfectly suited for survival in Ice Age Europe. Their incredible strength was just one part of a much bigger picture, a story of success, endurance, and evolution that allowed them to dominate Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. That tiny piece of cord might seem insignificant, but it changes everything we thought we knew about Neanderthals. To twist fibers together into rope requires understanding patterns, tension, and sequencing, all signs of advanced cognition. It means Neanderthals understood how individual strands could be combined to form something stronger, a concept that forms the basis of weaving, textiles, and even modern engineering. Think about what that implies. If they were making cord, they could have been creating nets, bags, traps, and even hafting tools more efficiently. That's not primitive thinking, that's innovation. All this evidence paints a picture of Neanderthals as deeply intelligent, creative, and adaptable. They weren't just surviving, they were problem-solving, inventing, and experimenting. They had culture, technology, and social structure. And the more we discover, the clearer it becomes. They weren't the dumb cavemen pop culture made them out to be. But their sophistication didn't stop with technology. The archaeological record also reveals evidence of symbolic thought, something once believed to be uniquely human. Across Europe, Neanderthal sites have yielded pigments like ochre and manganese dioxide, processed and stored for use as body paint or decoration. At some sites, shells and animal teeth show traces of pigment, suggesting they were worn as ornaments, jewelry. And then there's the art. In Spain, in caves like La Pasiega, Maltravieso, and Ardales, archaeologists discovered cave paintings dating back more than 64,000 years, long before modern humans arrived in Europe. These paintings, made with red pigments, depict geometric patterns and hand stencils that are unmistakably deliberate. The only people in Europe at that time were Neanderthals. That means they made them. This was revolutionary. It proved that Neanderthals were capable of symbolic expression, the same abstract thinking that underlies language, religion, and art. And it didn't end there. At Bruniquel Cave in France, deep underground where no natural light reaches, archaeologists found something even stranger. A circular structure built from broken stalagmites, carefully arranged and dated to around 176,000 years ago. This wasn't a shelter. It wasn't for storage. Whatever purpose it served, it required light, planning, and teamwork. Maybe it was ritual, maybe social, maybe something we can't even imagine. But whatever it was, it shows that Neanderthals were capable of organized, purposeful activity deep inside the earth, something that would challenge even modern explorers today. Taken together, these findings destroy the idea that Neanderthals were simple-minded or culturally barren. They were creative, deliberate, and intelligent beings with complex social lives and rich traditions. So if Neanderthals were so powerful, so clever, and so well adapted to their world, what happened? Why did they vanish while we survived? The truth is, it's complicated. Scientists have debated the question for decades, and there's no single answer, only a combination of factors that slowly pushed Neanderthals toward extinction. One major factor was climate change. Around 40,000 years ago, Europe experienced violent climate swings known as Heinrich events, sudden cold snaps that turned fertile forests into icy wastelands. Their prey disappeared, food sources became unpredictable, and the harsh environments they'd once mastered began to shift faster than they could adapt. Then came the arrival of modern humans, our own ancestors, around 45,000 years ago. They brought new tools, new hunting strategies, and possibly more complex social networks. Competition for the same resources would have been fierce. There's little evidence of open conflict, no mass graves or battle wounds, but even peaceful competition can wipe out a population over time. Modern humans might have simply outnumbered them, reproduced faster, or occupied the best territories, leaving Neanderthals struggling to survive. Another factor could have been disease. Modern humans migrating from Africa likely carried pathogens that Neanderthals had no immunity to. Even a few new infections could devastate small, isolated populations already weakened by climate and competition. But perhaps the most fascinating twist is that Neanderthals didn't actually vanish completely. Genetic studies of people living today, anyone whose ancestry lies outside Africa, reveal that most of us carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. That means our ancestors didn't just compete with Neanderthals, they interbred with them. In other words, Neanderthals didn't die out entirely. They became part of us. As their populations dwindled, they likely merged with modern human groups. Their genes blended into ours, their distinct lineage diluted over thousands of years, but never lost. So the story of Neanderthals isn't one of failure, it's one of transformation. They were powerful, intelligent survivors who dominated Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than modern humans have existed so far. Their legacy lives on in our DNA, in our bones, and maybe even in the way we think. The Neanderthals weren't evolutionary dead ends. They were a different kind of human, remarkable, resilient, and far more like us than anyone ever imagined. Their story reminds us that there's more than one way to be human, and that the line between us and them might be far thinner than we think. When worlds collide, Neanderthals meet us. When modern humans first set foot in Europe around 45,000 years ago, they weren't stepping into empty land. They were entering a world already ruled by the Neanderthals, a species that had dominated the continent for over 300,000 years. For thousands of years, these two types of humans coexisted, sometimes competing, sometimes avoiding each other, and sometimes, as we now know, coming together in ways that would change the human story forever. This meeting wasn't a simple clash between primitive and advanced. It was the convergence of two highly capable species, each uniquely adapted to survive in a brutal Ice Age world. Modern humans brought with them new tools, new materials, and new ways of thinking. Their toolkit included finely crafted blades, bone needles, and even musical instruments, innovations that show a strong creative and symbolic streak. But the Neanderthals weren't far behind. They had their own advanced technologies, their own understanding of fire, adhesives, and hunting strategies that had worked flawlessly for hundreds of generations. So, when these two human species finally crossed paths, it wasn't just about survival. It was about adaptation, exchange, and, eventually, fusion. The blending of two worlds. Archaeological evidence shows that, in some regions, Neanderthals adopted technologies introduced by modern humans, and vice versa. In certain sites across France and Central Europe, toolkits combine traits from both traditions, suggesting interaction, learning, and even cooperation. It's possible that some Neanderthal groups began to trade, communicate, or even form alliances with incoming humans. The lines between them and us started to blur. And somewhere along that line, something even more profound happened: interbreeding. Genetic evidence confirms it. Our ancestors and Neanderthals didn't just share the same land, they shared their lives. Every non-African person alive today carries between 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. That's not a random trace, that's legacy. Some of these Neanderthal genes still affect us today, influencing traits like immune response, hair and skin pigmentation, even sleep patterns, and how our bodies handle cold temperatures. In a very real way, the Neanderthal story didn't end. It lives on inside us. A subtle shift in balance. So why did they disappear while we endured? The answer likely lies in numbers and adaptability. Modern humans, with larger social networks and more diverse diets, could survive better when environments shifted. They formed larger, interconnected communities that shared resources and knowledge across vast distances. Neanderthals, in contrast, lived in smaller, more isolated groups. Their population may have never exceeded 70,000 individuals across all of Europe, roughly the crowd at a modern football stadium. That made them incredibly vulnerable to any disruption, whether climate change, disease, or competition. Add to that the arrival of new humans competing for food and territory, and even without violence, the pressure would have been immense. Slowly, over a few thousand years, their populations dwindled, not in a single catastrophic event, but through gradual absorption and decline. By around 38,000 years ago, the last known Neanderthal populations disappeared from the fossil record, but their DNA and their legacy remained. The last echoes of the Neanderthal world. Imagine being one of the last Neanderthals. You've inherited a world that your ancestors ruled for hundreds of thousands of years. You know every valley, every migration path, every prey animal. But now the world is changing. The winters are longer, the herds are thinner, and on the horizon there are strangers, smaller, slighter, but somehow everywhere. They speak differently. They make tools you've never seen, and they seem to multiply faster than the cold can kill them. Maybe there was fear, maybe curiosity, maybe even friendship. But over generations, the Neanderthal world faded, not with a war, but with a whisper. And yet, it didn't truly vanish. When modern humans looked at those strangers and saw something familiar enough to love, the Neanderthal story merged with ours, and their blood still runs in our veins today. The legacy of the Neanderthals. The more we learn about them, the more they challenge what it means to be human. They were intelligent, they were creative, they were emotional beings capable of care, art, and cooperation. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals ruled Europe, surviving glacial winters, mastering fire and stone, and thriving in conditions we could barely endure. And though their bones turned to dust long ago, their DNA, their memory, endures in us. They were not our failed cousins. They were our ancestors, our teachers, and in many ways, our equals. Their story isn't a tale of extinction, it's a story of connection. The story of the Neanderthals didn't end 40,000 years ago. It continues, in us. Every time you look in the mirror, there's a good chance a small part of what you see, your skin tone, your hair texture, even your immune system, carries echoes of Neanderthal DNA. When geneticists first sequenced the Neanderthal genome in 2010, it changed everything we thought we knew about human evolution. The discovery revealed something astonishing. Every person alive today whose ancestry lies outside of Africa carries between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. That might not sound like much, but those fragments have real, measurable effects. The Neanderthals didn't just vanish, they became part of us. The genetic legacy. Neanderthal genes show up in some surprising places. For example, several genes inherited from them are involved in skin and hair adaptation, traits that helped early humans survive in colder, darker environments. Lighter skin tones, which allow for better vitamin D production in low sunlight, may have partly come from our Neanderthal ancestors. The same goes for certain hair textures and colors, traits that once helped Ice Age humans adapt to Europe's harsh climate. Some Neanderthal genes also shape how our immune systems work. They pass down alleles that help fight off viruses and bacteria, an evolutionary advantage for early humans encountering new diseases after leaving Africa. But it wasn't all benefit. Some of these ancient genes are double-edged swords. Variants linked to stronger immune responses can also increase the risk of autoimmune disorders like lupus, Crohn's disease, and type 2 diabetes. Others affect how we respond to sunlight, allergens, and even the risk of nicotine addiction. The Neanderthal legacy is literally written in our biology, a mix of strengths and vulnerabilities, just like theirs. The mind of the ancestors. What's even more fascinating is that some of those Neanderthal genes may still shape how we think and feel. Recent research has linked Neanderthal DNA to traits like sleep patterns, mood regulation, and even circadian rhythms, how our bodies react to daylight and darkness. In other words, part of why some people are night owls, while others wake at dawn, might trace back to Ice Age Europe. There's also evidence suggesting that Neanderthal variants affect neurological traits. Some genes influence the development of brain regions involved in emotional processing, stress response, and memory. This doesn't mean they made us smarter or dumber. It means that the Neanderthal contribution added new diversity to the human mind, expanding the range of how we perceive, react, and adapt to the world around us. Their DNA didn't just shape our bodies, it shaped our psychology. The echoes of survival. When you think about it, this makes sense. Neanderthals evolved for life in a world that tested every aspect of endurance, freezing cold, dangerous megafauna, and constant scarcity. Their genes were survival blueprints, honed for strength, resilience, and adaptation. When modern humans arrived from Africa, mixing with Neanderthals wasn't just inevitable, it was beneficial. Their DNA gave our ancestors an instant upgrade, equipping them to survive in Europe's brutal Ice Age conditions. So, while their species eventually faded, Their legacy lived on through us, not as fossils, but as living code passed from parent to child, generation after generation, all the way to the present day, rethinking what it means to be human. For centuries, we told ourselves that Neanderthals were the losers of evolution, the ones who couldn't keep up, who vanished while we advanced. But the truth is far more complex and far more humbling. They weren't replaced. They were absorbed. They weren't defeated. They became part of the story that led to us.